Well, good afternoon. It's great to be here on behalf of the Hibbing Area Chamber of Commerce and what is our last candidate forum for the election season. And we're privileged tonight to have our congressional candidates here for Congressional District 8, and we've got our current Congressman Pete Stauber here, and the challenger Jen Schultz here, who is from the teaches at the University of Minnesota Duluth. And the two of them are going to be answering some questions that myself, Pastor Dan Erickson, and Steve Potts of Hibbing Community College will be moderating the forum tonight, asking those questions. You'll be answering them. I'll be asking them. Also, I just want to express our appreciation to Hibbing Public Access Television. And they are always so helpful, and they are making this possible for those of you who are watching it on the website to see. Thank you to them, and also thank you to our timekeeper, who also happens to be the president of the Hibbing Area Chamber of Commerce, and that's Shelley Hansen. And she's the timekeeper, and you all, I think, maybe then she'll be holding up the cards telling you when your time is up. And I usually do this in private, but so when it says time's up, you may finish your sentence, but please do not have 15 commas in your sentence that you're finishing. We know that some of our more local candidates are prone, boy, 90 seconds is a long time to talk and giving an answer, but congressional candidates, yeah, you have a lot to say, and that's wonderful. So. Okay, well, we're ready to start, and we'll start with a 2-minute opening statement, and Congressman Stauber is going to go first.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks, Steve and Dan and Shelley for moderating, and thanks to the Hibbing Chamber of Commerce for putting this event on, and to all of you joining us. And again, I want to thank my opponent for joining me in this third debate. You know, when I talk to my constituents, they are worried. Inflation is skyrocketing. Working families are feeling the pressure every time they fill their gas tank up. And now Minnesotans will have record high heating bills this winter as Joe Biden takes us further into a recession. This is our third and final debate this fall. When I put together the debate schedule, I made it a priority to conclude the debate season right here in Hibbing on the Iron Range. When it comes to getting our economy moving again, we have the solutions right here under our feet. Let's be perfectly clear. I support iron ore mining, copper nickel mining, precious metals mining, and I am the only one in this race who can say that. While I am fighting in Congress against Joe Biden's anti-jobs and anti-mining agenda, my opponent is in St. Paul, writing and voting with the Twin Cities liberals to abolish our mining industry. My opponent is endorsed by Friends of the Boundary Waters, whose stated purpose is to ban mining on the Iron Range. She is funded by Betty McCollum's super PAC, who wants to permanently ban copper nickel mining in Minnesota. And she is the chief author of the most anti-mining piece of legislation in our state's history. And let's be clear, she supports Joe Biden pulling the Twin Metals leases. Unlike my opponent, I am the champion for mining on the Iron Range and in the United States. I am fighting for our way of life. I am fighting for our families. I look forward to tonight's discussion on how we can get the Iron Range, Minnesota, and America back on track.
Okay, thank you, Congressman. Jen, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Well, I want to thank the City of Hibbing and the Chamber for hosting, and to our moderator and timekeeper, Shelley and Dan, thank you so much. I'm Jen Schultz, and I'm running for Congress to solve problems and get things done. For the past 8 years, I've been a state representative doing just that, working across the aisle, working with all parties. And what you've just heard are a bunch of lies. It makes a good sound clip for Pete's campaign, but it's not. A lot of that is not true, and I'll clarify for the rest of the debate. But it is consistent with his other lies. I was raised in a rural township. My parents married after my father returned from Vietnam. He became a firefighter. My parents divorced when I was 5. My mother raised me and my older sister, and we struggled. I know what it's like to struggle, to not have money, to take government assistance for a short time, to have housing and food. And it's a problem for many people I'm meeting across the 8th District. I've put on over 30,000 miles traveling across this district. I've been everywhere, and I'm going to continue to show up and listen and work really hard to make sure all of you, all of your families, and your communities are thriving. I've been teaching economics at UMD since 2004 after having worked my way through college and graduate school at the U. My husband, Rob, is a criminologist, and we have 2 sons, and our home is in Duluth. I have a strong track record of getting things done. While others are pointing fingers, blaming one another, playing politics, I'm on the ground solving problems because that's how I was raised, to work hard, to be decent, to fight for fairness, and to help others. And what I've learned are people are tired of the polarization. They just want their elected officials delivering results. I promise that I will work for everyone. I will show up, I will listen, I will work hard for everybody. Because I care. That's why I'm running, because I care about you, your families, and your communities.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Okay, time for the first question. I was looking for a softball to get us on a light note, but I don't think we have one of those. So here's a question, Jen, to you first. And again, you'll have 90 seconds to answer, each of you, and then you'll each have 30 seconds for a response. Would you favor continuing military and economic aid to the Ukraine to further frustrate Russian plans?
Well, thank you for the question. Ukraine, we must stand with the Ukrainians. We are fighting to make sure that we strengthen democracies, to protect our own democracy. We cannot allow Russia to dominate Finland, the Baltic countries, Eastern Europe. And I know that many of you have grandparents, parents from many of those countries. And I know many of you really care about our democracy and helping people. Ukrainians, they're being bombed out of their houses. People are dying in Ukraine. Children are being taken from the homes of people in Ukraine. You need to put people over party. And right now, the Republican leadership wants to cut funding to Ukraine. That's in their commitment to America. And that is not supported by most Americans. So yes, I support funding for Ukraine to protect our democracy, and because it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Jen. Congressman, would you favor continuing military and economic aid to Ukraine to further frustrate Russian plans?
You know, I think we have to look why we're in this place in the first place, why we're here. It's because of failed leadership by Joe Biden. When Joe Biden disastrously left Afghanistan the way he did, killing 13 service members because of his decision, leaving our friends and allies in Afghanistan who helped us for 20 years. Their families were murdered, beheaded. When the world saw the way Joe Biden disastrously left Afghanistan, they knew we had a weak leader. And when you have a weak leader, somebody's going to fill that void. Vladimir Putin has filled that void. Kim Jong-un in North Korea has filled that void. Xi Jinping from the communist country of China has filled that void. Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, which was totally wrong. We've made good investments and healthy investments into Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Each day, the dynamics change on the ground. Ukraine is making small strides as we sit here today. And we need Ukraine to win. We cannot have Vladimir Putin and Russia take over Ukraine, because if they do that, it's going to embolden Xi Jinping to take over Taiwan.
Okay, thank you, Congressman. Jen, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Well, our current president actually held Putin accountable for his invasion of Ukraine by imposing stiff economic sanctions. He strengthened the NATO alliance, our president did, in support of Ukraine after the Russian invasion by endorsing the inclusion of world military powers of Sweden and Finland. This year, the current administration is funding and have funded Ukrainians and helped them militarily. And that's what people in this country want. I don't think my opponent actually answered the question, and I encourage him to do so.
Okay. Congressman, 30 seconds.
Well, when you look at what's happening in Ukraine and why Russia invaded, it was because of lack of leadership. Right now, the peace talks aren't even involving the United States of America. America does not have a presence in the peace talks because the world understands Joe Biden has failed in his leadership. They see it. And the fact of the matter is, Ukraine has to defend themselves against Russia's invasion.
Okay, thank you. Second question, Congressman will get this one first. I think you'll have different answers for this one. If you were a teacher, what grade would you give to President Biden?
F.
Congressman.
He's failed. And it's an F with a red circle around it. Look at what's happening with the reckless spending in the United States. It's caused 40-year high inflation. It's caused gas prices to go through the roof, energy prices through the roof, groceries 3 and 4 times what they should be. The fact of the matter is, when I was in Finlayson 3 weeks ago talking to seniors at their kitchen table, one senior stated at the end of the month, once she balanced her checkbook, she had $12 for herself in Biden's economy. One other senior said she couldn't visit her grandchildren because she can't afford the gas. And another one showed me her retirement security. She lost 30% in 1 year under Biden's failed economy. It doesn't have to be this way. We can be energy independent. We can be the leader in the world. And the fact of the matter is, Joe Biden has failed, and my opponent will be a rubber stamp for Joe Biden and his agenda.
Okay, Jen, the same question for you. If you were a teacher, which you were, what grade would you give President Biden?
Well, first I would give him a B, I guess, if you really want me to answer that question. But you know what? It's hard to be a president. And I actually give Pete Stauber an F on his performance the last 4 years because he has actually accomplished nothing. He deserves the F. And I'm gonna go through a list of all of the things that have happened this year. You tell me, you think about it, and tell me if you support these items. Because yes, I'm an economist. I wanna work on the economic issues, and I've been trained to do that with help from you, taxpayers helping me get through graduate school, and I'm paying that back to be an economist for the people. But, you know, they passed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure package. That's $7 billion for Minnesota, 100,000 jobs for Minnesota that Stauber voted against. That's roads, bridges, ports, airports, and broadband, which is desperately needed. They passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act to invest in youth mental health in our schools. Stauber voted no. They cut child poverty in half through the American Rescue Plan. Stauber voted no. They capped prescription drug prices at $2,000 per year for seniors on Medicare through the Inflation Reduction Act. Stauber voted no. They imposed a 15% minimum corporate tax on some of the largest corporations in the country, making sure they pay their fair share. Stauber voted no. They gave Medicare the power to negotiate drug prices. Stauber voted no. There are a lot of other things he voted no on that I'll talk a lot about. That's why Stauber deserves an F and Biden deserves a B.
Congressman, your response?
About 3 weeks ago, my opponent was interviewed by Minnesota Public Radio and was asked about Joe Biden's failed policies and unpopular policies. And she stated she was so impressed with what Biden has accomplished. So impressed at a 40-year high inflation. So impressed with open borders. So impressed with a foreign policy that's been a disaster. So impressed with $5 a gallon gas. Simply unacceptable, and it doesn't have to be this way.
Stop misrepresenting what I say and what I do, Pete. People are tired of the lies that you tell them in your newsletters and on your website. People are tired. I have no reason to lie to you. I have no reason to lie to you because I'm not bought by corporate interests. I am not taking corporate PAC money. Stauber gets over $1 million from corporate interests. He has gone DC. He has forgotten about the people in the 8th district, and it's a problem. And if we have to endure 2 more years of Stauber as our congressperson, we're in big trouble because he's gonna leave a lot of money outside of Minnesota on the table that we deserve to hire more people, to bring manufacturing back. Yes, inflation. You know what's causing inflation? Price gouging by corporations. They're getting billions of dollars in profits on our backs.
Okay, you can continue, however, Jen, because this question is for you. What is the best way that Congress can act to control and reduce inflation?
Yes, there's a lot that we can do, but first let me back up a second. The main cause of inflation, all you have to do is look at the numbers. Over half of the money people are paying in increased prices is going to corporate profits. For over 40 years, it was only 10% of price increases were going to corporate profits. Now it's over 50%. The largest oil companies are making over $20 billion in profits this quarter. They're buying back stocks. Their shareholders are gaining wealth on our backs, on the backs of working people. They're passing that on to shareholders. They should be passing on the profits in the form of lower gas prices. That is the truth. It's been fact-checked. That is the truth. And we need to address these large mergers and acquisitions, large consolidations, market concentration. We need stronger antitrust policy. We need to help families, and a lot of the initiatives that were passed this year are helping families with their high cost of prescription drugs, healthcare, heating bills. There is a huge grant available, dollars, in the bill that Stauber voted against to help you with your heating bills. But there's a lot more we can do, and I want to do it.
Congressman, same question for you. What is the best way Congress can act to control or reduce inflation?
Dan, the first thing we have to do is stop the reckless spending. My opponent just mentioned several bills. Billions and billions and billions of dollars spent on Christmas gifts to other politicians. I don't support Biden's failed agenda. I don't support Biden's failed economy. Look at what it's done to the people in this country, and right here in the 8th District. We have to stop the spending. That's led to a 40-year high inflation. It's led to high gas prices, as I talked about, high grocery prices. One of the ways we can fix that is become energy independent, energy dominant. My opponent supports Joe Biden's war on American energy. He declared war on American energy 5 hours after being sworn in. Killed the XL Keystone Pipeline. Thousands of jobs. Stopped oil drilling on federal lands and waters. We can drill for those traditional fuels cleaner than anybody. In fact, 40% cleaner. Why wouldn't we use American energy and American technology and American workers? Joe Biden and my opponent have to get on the side of American energy.
Okay, thank you. Jen, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Can you repeat the question, please? Are we on a rebuttal?
It's a response.
Okay,
Yes.
Worried about government
Inflation.
spending? Worried about government spending? Let's look at Pete Stauber's expenses in office. He spends $1,000 at a exclusive Capitol Hill club to wine and dine with lobbyists. He spends a lot of money from his campaign donations, wining and dining with lobbyists at that Capitol Hill club. Look at what he's using taxpayer dollars for franking mail to send out things that officially not breaking any rule, but probably not ethical, things that look like campaign literature. So let's look at Pete Stauber's spending, how he spends taxpayer dollars too.
Okay, Congressman, 30 seconds.
Again, 3 weeks ago when my opponent was asked on Minnesota Public Radio about Biden's failed agenda and economic policy, she said she was so impressed with what Biden has accomplished. Give me a break. His failed energy and economic policies are crushing middle-class families, not only in our district and across Minnesota, but across the country.
Okay, thank you. And so, Congressman, this question is to you. First, should Congress support increasing the number of justices on the Supreme Court?
Well, I think that the 9 justices in the United States Supreme Court have been in place for over 150 years. When they rule, it becomes the law of the land. And when elite Democrats in Washington don't agree with her opinion, they want to change the rules. They want to pack the court. Joe Biden has said he wants to pack the court. That's unnecessary. It's like they took their football and went home because they didn't get the ruling that they wanted by the U.S. Supreme Court. For 150 years, 9 Supreme Court justices have done a very, very good job. We may not agree with them all the time, but that's the supreme law of the land. And my opponent supports Biden's packing of the court. Totally unacceptable. And I disagree with that. Our Supreme Court does a good job with major and hard decisions that come their way.
Okay, Jen, same question for you. Should Congress support increasing the number of justices on the Supreme Court?
Well, Pete, you're running against me. You're not running against Joe Biden. You're not running for president. You're running for Congress in the 8th District. So please, answer the question as if you're running for Congress and not president. I guess maybe that's what you're gearing up to do. But to answer the question about the Supreme Court, we wouldn't have to do anything if Congress was doing their job, such as codifying Roe v. Wade, making sure that voting rights are in the Constitution, marriage equality. We wouldn't have to depend on the court that is unelected and serves for life if Congress was doing its job, if there was less gridlock, if my opponent was doing his job. Congress has been paralyzed for too long. Pete Stauber just adds to the gridlock in Congress and is not getting anything done. He is not willing to compromise. He is not willing to work with whoever is president, and I am, and I have. I have 8 years of working across the aisle, passing legislation, historic investments in health and human services. When nothing got done this year, very little, because it was so polarized and contentious, Jen Schultz got it done. I got it done, passed 2 very large health and human service bills with bipartisan support in the Senate. I've been doing that for 8 years because I've only served in a divided legislature. I'm going to do that in Congress and show them how it's done.
Okay, Congressman, 30 seconds.
My opponent will be a rubber stamp for Joe Biden and his failed policies. There is no question about it.
Jen, 30 seconds.
Who's the rubber stamp? Look at Pete Stauber's voting record. He votes in lockstep with Republicans. Even when it's for affordable insulin, voted no. To address infant formula shortage, voted no. Voted twice against burn pit coverage for veterans. Who votes against veterans? My father is a Vietnam veteran. Who votes against veterans? Pete Stauber votes against veterans.
Okay, Jen, this question is, it's hard to keep track
I
of
know.
but this is for you first. Do you think the federal government should be paying off student loan debts?
I've been in higher education for a long time, and I have students who really struggle to pay bills. And one of the reasons I ran for office was to make higher education tuition at UMD more affordable, to get more state funding for each student, because it was an unfair allocation across the Minnesota State and University of Minnesota campuses. And we have food shelves at universities. I had a student living in his car. This should not happen. We need to make sure we're funding all types of education, training programs, apprentice programs. We need to help students because you know what? They are the engines of growth. We have a huge workforce shortage in this country. We need to go back to investing in education because the return on that investment is so very large. Why we have so many employers moving to this state, because we have a highly trained and educated workforce, and we need to keep that up. Pete Stauber had an over $80,000 PPP loan that was completely forgiven. And almost on the same day, he came out and denounced the debt relief for students. We're giving so much subsidies to corporations. Working people should not feel guilty about helping one another get through education and training and higher education programs.
Thank you. Congressman, same question for you. Do you think the federal government should be paying off student loan debts?
People who didn't go to college should not be forced to pay student loans for those that did. This is Biden's political stunt to gain votes. It's not fair. What we have to look at is why is the cost of education, tuition, outpacing inflation? My opponent just said she's been working on it at UMD. UMD tuition has far outpaced inflation in the last 10 years. Students can't afford it. What we need to really look at, and I think we have to understand there's a path for those folks that want to go to four-year, but we also have to work at career and technical education. That should be a component that our junior high school students should be brought forth. Our junior highs and our high schools should be involved in the trades. They should, have sheet metal, woodworking, electric classes, auto body. This is where we can get them interested in the building and construction trades, those blue-collar jobs that we need more of. And when they get out of these registered apprenticeships, they're going to make a lot of money for the rest of their life with no debt.
Okay, thank you. Jen, 30 seconds.
We want to give everybody opportunities. I am 100% behind our trades. That's why I'm endorsed by almost every labor group, every labor union, and I'm proud of it. I have a 100% AFL-CIO voting record. I've been fighting for our brothers and sisters in unions for a long, long time. And my son wants to be a plumber. Whatever their opportunities, whatever they want to do to achieve their dreams, we can make it possible. That's why this country is so great, because we invest in education and training. We invest in the things that we all care about. Your schools are so important. We want to invest in schools, and all training.
Thank you. Congressman, 30 seconds.
Again, people who didn't go to college should not be forced to pay tuition for those that did, and it's unfair.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Congressman, you are first. Should Congress vote to abolish the Electoral College?
No. Our founding fathers knew that rural America mattered. The 10 electoral votes in Minnesota matter. We cannot allow San Francisco, New York, Dallas, the bigger cities, elect our president. Rural America matters. Right here in Hibbing, we matter as much as anybody down in St. Paul. Ely residents matter just as much as somebody down in Minneapolis. We need to protect the Electoral College. Our founding fathers were way ahead of themselves when they realized that rural America needed a voice. Rural America matters. We live in a rural district. And our votes right up here in Hibbing should matter. To abolish the Electoral College, this is another tantrum by the elitists in Washington who want to change the game because they didn't get their way. It's unacceptable. The Electoral College has been beneficial all these years. They've done a good job. It's been good for rural America, and I would not support abolishing the Electoral College because rural America must always have a voice.
Good, thank you. Jen, same question. Should Congress vote to abolish the Electoral College?
Well, everyone matters. I'm from a rural community. Everyone matters. And when I talk to people, do you know what they're telling me? They want their vote to count. They want their vote to count. And so we could make everyone's vote count by abolishing the Electoral College and going to a national popular vote. That is an option. And there have been over 700 bills introduced on that option. I think in 1969, a bill passed the House, but not the Senate. So this country has been talking about this for a long time. But everybody matters. I was in Hackensack, and the mayor, his name is Bill, gave me a tour of Hackensack, which is near Walker, with about 250 people. It's the smallest town with a brewery. He was so proud of the investments we were making in infrastructure in his town because he wants to make sure it's coming back. He's bringing back Main Street. And I've seen that across this district. Small communities are starting to thrive again, and we need to continue that investment. Those infrastructure funds are so important, and Pete Stauber voted against those funds. I'm hearing from mayors across the district that are trying to get grant funding from those bills that Stauber voted no on. He is not helping them, and it's a problem. And we cannot survive another 2 years of Pete Stauber not willing to work with the current administration to bring back federal dollars to the district. It's jobs, and it's going to help those rural communities, and Stauber is a barrier.
Thank you. 30 seconds in response, Congressman.
I think the question was on the Electoral College. Again, I do not support abolishing the Electoral College. Rural Minnesota matters. Hibbing matters just as much as Minneapolis or St. Paul. I refuse to allow the constituents who live in the 8th Congressional District to be owned by the Twin Cities elites in the big cities. Our votes matter. I do not support abolishing the Electoral College.
Jen, you have 30 seconds to
Well,
respond.
let's talk about who's owned. Pete Stauber is owned by corporate interests. They're funding his campaign. I'm only taking money from individuals, mostly in Minnesota, mostly in the 8th District, individuals, and my friends in unions. That's it. I am not taking any corporate PAC money because I'm voting for you. I'm telling you the truth, and I will continue to do that, and I will show up. He spends a lot of his campaign money outside the state. A lot of Stauber's campaign money comes from corporations and corporate interests. He's beholden to them when he votes.
Time. Thank you. Okay, it's halftime, and I turn the podium over to my esteemed colleague, Mr. Steve Potts.
Thank you, Pastor Dan. So are we enjoying our spirited debate so far?
I'm having fun.
Yes, we are.
Good, we'll try to continue that. Jen, this one to you first. What do you see as the three most important issues facing the new Congress in January 2023?
Well, thank you for that question. When you're in Congress, you are responsible for taking care of a lot of different issues. And I've been doing that for 8 years. We need to improve the economy for working people, improve our economy for working people by holding corporations responsible for their corporate profits and corporate greed. That's number one. We need to protect our democracy and strengthen our democracy. Maybe put right to vote in our Constitution, get dark money out of campaign financing, comprehensive immigration reform. We need to codify Roe v. Wade. We have a farm bill coming up, which is very important. We have a lot of farmers in the district that I'm meeting with. They're concerned. They're concerned about corporate greed in the seed and fertilizer companies. We need to fund education, and we have 7 tribes in the 8th district now. And they have a lot of concerns, and Stauber isn't showing up to listen to their concerns. He's actively campaigned against Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland. And they need infrastructure funding. So we need to make sure that their voice is heard, that the person elected is going to show up and have public town halls that are face-to-face rather than spend a lot of taxpayer money on expensive telephone town halls and you can't get your question answered. He's not showing up. You have to go back and think about Nolan and Oberstar. They showed up and they listened. Pete Stauber, I don't know where he's hiding, but he's not showing up.
Congressman Stauber, the same question. What do you see as the three most important issues facing the new Congress in January 2023?
I think, Jeff, on January 3rd, there's going to be a new day in America. There's going to be spending that's going to be relevant. We're not going to put legislation forward that just spends trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars on Green New Deal ideas that punishes Americans. We're going to put legislation that's going to strengthen our economy. We're going to put legislation together that keeps our cities and our communities safe, that fund the police, not voting to disarm and defund the police like my opponent. We are going to make sure that Biden has a foreign policy that puts America and our allies first. We're going to make sure that we're energy independent and critical mineral dominance. That's the idea, that's the American agenda that I look forward to participating in on January 3rd. Biden has failed us in every part of the equation here. Energy policy. We're paying more than we ever have for gas, for heating, and it's punishing us. Critical minerals. Shortly after he was elected, he pulled the Twin Metals leases that my opponent supports. He pulled the Twin Metals leases that can give us critical minerals dominance and secure our supply chain. You know, time's up.
Jen, 30 seconds for additions.
Well, Stauber's punishing us by not representing us in Congress. and not helping our communities. That is a punishment. Republicans only seem to care about national debt and deficits when there's a Democrat in office. When our former president was in office, we added over $7 trillion to the debt. Our current president has reduced our debt by $1.4 trillion. So that's a fact.
Congressman, 30 seconds for additions.
Again, January 3rd, there's going to be a new day in America. There's going to be legislation that puts America first, strengthens our economy, makes our communities and streets safer, and we will be accountable to the American people.
Congressman Stelber, this question for you first.
I can't hear you.
Congressman Stelber, this question for you first. The minerals northern Minnesota can produce are vital to our economy and national defense. What can you do to promote responsible mining in northern Minnesota?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing the question.
Okay. The minerals northern Minnesota can produce are vital to our economy and national defense. What can you do to promote responsible mining in northern Minnesota?
Well, I've been promoting it for the last 20 years, unlike my opponent in the last 2 months. We have the biggest copper nickel find in the world right here in our backyard. 95% of our nation's nickel reserve, 88% of our copper or cobalt, over a third of our copper and other platinum group metals. These are minerals we need in our everyday lives. We need these minerals to secure our supply chain. We need these minerals to be mined here. We should never count on China, the communist country of China. If we've learned anything, Jeff, involving COVID and our supply chain, we cannot rely on foreign adversarial nations for these critical minerals that we use in our medical instrument technology and our defense weapons and our defense mechanisms. You know, my opponent drove up here in a Prius. A Prius has 110 pounds of copper in it. Where does she want to get that copper for her Prius? Does she want to get it from here on the Iron Range using the best environmental standards and the best labor standards? Or does she want to continue to get it from China and Russia, who use child slave labor? It's unacceptable. We have the best environmental standards and the best labor standards in the world. I am going to fight for mining, and the people in Congress know that I'm fighting for mining. Both Democrats and Republicans come to me for advice.
Thank you. Jen, the same question. The minerals northern Minnesota can produce are vital to our economy and national defense. What can you do to promote responsible mining in northern Minnesota?
I am 100% for our miners and our mining industry. That is a fact. That is why I'm endorsed by the U.S. Steelworkers and many other groups that work in the mines. We need to bring it back. My opponent, Pete Stauber, has done absolutely nothing for our mining industry. Zero. In fact, he voted against it when he voted no on the CHIPS Act, which provides incentives to use U.S. domestic minerals to make computer chips. He voted no on the Inflation Reduction Act that has incentives to use domestic minerals to make electric vehicle batteries. He voted against the mining industry. He hasn't passed one pro-mining bill. Yeah, I'm taking money from everybody in the 8th that cares about our community in 8th District. Individuals, yes. Environmental groups have endorsed me. Yes, the tribes, I believe, support me. You know why? I'm gonna bring everyone to the table and we're gonna figure out the problem and we're gonna solve it. We're gonna solve the mining problems that we have. Permitting, we need to fix permitting. But everyone agrees, and I've been to all the mines in Minnesota, everyone agrees that we can't pollute the water. And you know what? There's 4 technologies already available that just need to be scaled up, and we need federal money that Stauber refuses to get to do that, to make sure we can go forward and avoid all the litigation that we're seeing. And he's done nothing, but I am for mining. He votes against it.
Congressman Stelber, 30 seconds for additions.
Mining is our past, our present, and our future, and I can assure you our future is very, very bright. I've been supporting critical minerals, copper nickel mining for almost 20 years. I was at the rallies on the range. I was at the Polymet rallies in Duluth. in Aurora, in St. Paul. I was at the Twin Metals rallies supporting our miners. At the same time, she was down in St. Paul writing the most anti-PISA mining legislation in our state's history.
That is a lie. That is a very much of a lie. I am not the chief author of the Prove It First bill, which is what Stauber said in his opening statement. That is a lie. I'm signed on to it as a co-sponsor. It hasn't gone anywhere. And guess what? Do you even know what that bill is?
There's not.
You're interrupting. Do you know what that bill is? That bill just says you need to prove it. And you know what? We already have 3 mines in this country that Julie Lucas so fondly wrote about in her column in the DNT. We have the Flambeau mine, the Eagle mine, the Stillwater mine. So that bill is not controversial at all. It is not controversial at all.
Not one Republican has signed on to that partisan bill.
I'm not the chief author of that bill. I've signed on to a lot of bills. That bill hasn't gone anywhere, and it's not controversial because everybody wants clean water when we do mining. Not controversial at all.
Time out. All right, Jen, this is for you first. Mineral leases held at the former SR site are primarily a state issue, but what can the federal government do to keep Hibbing Taconite open and productive, saving hundreds of jobs?
Well, first of all, I don't know what rallies you're showing up at, but you're not showing up at the rallies I'm showing up at, because I've been to Keewatin. I talked to over 70 U.S. steelworkers recently. I've been to Virginia marching with the steelworkers because they don't have a contract yet. And I'm showing up tomorrow, too. You do not show up to those rallies. You haven't been there, and you weren't in session because Congress wasn't in session. HIBTAC, yeah, I just talked to a retired teacher. Her daughter works at HIBTAC. They're very worried about HIBTAC idling or closing. And there are solutions to that. Luckily, the state of Minnesota has the authority now to get the leases back from Mesabi Metallics. That could be a solution to open up those leases, so HIBTAC potentially could apply. We could, you know what we really need? We really need a champion to bring U.S. Steel to the table and Cleveland Cliffs to the table and figure out how are we going to find more iron ore so HIBTAC doesn't close. Guess who hasn't done that? Pete Stauber hasn't done that. I'm working on an iron air battery that relies on iron ore. I want to bring that company, that manufacturing, to the range. I'm doing that as a candidate. Just imagine what I can do in Congress.
Congressman Stauber, same question. Mineral leases held at the former SR site are primarily a state issue, but what can the federal government do to help keep Hibbing Taconite open and productive, saving hundreds of jobs?
We need to make sure that Hibbing Taconite stays open. I would just say this, that Governor Walz had time to watch Minneapolis burn for 3 days. You'd think he'd have enough time to meet with these union leaders and business owners and community leaders on how to make a decision on those leases. He has failed the state of Minnesota, and he has divided our communities. My opponent just says, you'd think he'd have time. Yes, Governor Walz has time, and the Minnesota DNR has time to sit down and look at the leases, what's the most beneficial, and then make a decision. Be a leader and make a decision. And Tim Walz has failed this.
30 seconds for any additions.
The iron air battery, it will mean hundreds of jobs to the district. This is a battery that's only going to increase in the demand, and it's needed to store energy from solar and wind, and it's the size of a bathroom. But there's a company with scientists at MIT. I want to be at that table talking to them to bring the manufacturing plant to northern Minnesota. We need to diversify jobs in northern Minnesota so those steel workers have leverage in contracts. They have leverage with U.S. Steel. They have leverage with Cleveland Cliffs. We need to diversify because, you know what? At some point, all of our minerals are going to be exhausted. And then what?
Congressman Stauber, 30 seconds for additions.
I'm actually 3.5 years ahead of my opponent on this. I'm actually bringing those business to our region. I've actually talked to those businesses. The business that she mentioned, I first spoke with them 3 years ago and talked to them about coming to the Iron Range. I toured one of their facilities. I've met with them. I want them to bring their facility right here to the Iron Range. So I'm 3.5 years ahead of her.
This is the first time I've heard you mention that, and if you've been, it's 3.5 years seems like a long time. It should have happened by now. Something's wrong.
Like I said, a spirited debate. Congressman Stelber, this one to you first. Increases in violent crime have Americans deeply concerned about their well-being. What can Congress do to improve public safety and reduce violent crime?
Yeah. As a law enforcement officer for 23 years, I've seen violence firsthand. I survived an off-duty gunshot to the head in '95. A few years after that, a violent criminal got the jump on me, pulled a handgun, pulled the trigger, put it to my head, pulled the trigger, and it malfunctioned. And I knew it malfunctioned because I saw it in his eyes. I was fighting for my life. I know, and I felt violence. What has to happen is we have to support our police department. My opponent voted to not only disarm, but to defund the police departments. That's unacceptable. That type of agenda has allowed crime across our nation to increase. The recruitment, retention, and morale in law enforcement is at an all-time low because of that extreme disarm and defund the police movement. It has to stop. In addition to that, we need to invest in best practices for our law enforcement. Again, in Congress, I'm one of only 5 that have ever worn the local uniform. Democrats and Republicans come to me looking for answers on legislation that will push the law enforcement profession ahead and keep them safe. And the bottom line is the disarm and defunding has had devastating damages to safe communities across this country.
Thank you. Jen, the same question. Increases in violent crime have Americans deeply concerned about their well-being. What can Congress do to improve public safety and reduce violent crime?
Crime is a problem that we need to address. My husband's a criminologist. We talk about it all the time. My opponent is in Congress and has offered no solutions. In fact, he voted against billions of dollars to fund the police. I voted in favor to fund $340 million investment in our police and law enforcement and public safety. That's a fact. It's on the record. Pete Stauber voted against investigating the January 6th insurrection. That led to 140 injuries of the DC and Capitol Police that were trying to protect him, protect our democracy. He didn't even go to the funeral of the police officer who died as a result of his injuries. I know that if you were protected by a police officer, that he died because he or she's protecting your life, you would go to that funeral. Pete Stauber did not. He's lying when he's talking about my statements on policing. We need to invest more to attract the best and the brightest to the police force. We need to do that. Pete Stauber voted against it. He voted against other bills that would address crime. I completely understand people's concerns with crime and their safety. But when I talk to people throughout the district, that is not one of their top 3. They feel safe because they feel their law enforcement police officers are doing a good job protecting them in their community. But some people don't, and that's what we need to address.
Congressman, 30 seconds for any additions.
I don't know what world my opponent is living in if she thinks crime is not an issue. To vote to disarm and defund has had consequences right here in the 8th District. It's had deadly consequences. You can't vote against the police and then in an election year, 2 weeks before an election, say, I support the police. The men and women in the blue and brown know that I will always have their back.
You did not have their back during the insurrection. You did not have their back after the insurrection. I am so tired of hearing these lies about me saying I defund. I did not defund the police. I, in fact, funded the police. I funded the police. You defunded the police. Pete Stauber has defunded the police. He voted against billions of dollars in law enforcement. Talk to your local police officers, please. Crime is a problem. We see rising crime, but The underlying problems we have to address. Why is crime rising? Why poverty, inequity, people with guns that are very violent that shouldn't have guns? Those are the problems we have to address.
Jen, you get this question first, hopefully less controversial. Immigration, legal and illegal, is an ongoing problem. What solutions might the federal government offer to deal with this challenge?
Yes, we need to address immigration. We need comprehensive immigration reform. Pete Stauber voted no on a bipartisan immigration bill. That's a fact. What we really need to do is address applications for asylum in the country of origin, so families are not threatened, their lives are not put at risk trying to cross our border. But we also have a huge workforce shortage. And so we need to work on H-1 and H-1B visas and E-3 visas so we can address our workforce shortage and have a path to citizenship in this country. Chambers of commerce across this country are asking for those items. There's bipartisan support for those items. When I've toured all over the 8th District, visited rural communities, we have assisted living facilities, we have nursing facilities that cannot find enough staff to care for our loved ones, and that is a problem. So we can solve it. That should be a priority for the next Congress, is solving immigration reform and having a path to citizenship. So I'm willing to take that on, to learn more about it, but also to solve the problem. My opponent, Pete Stauber, has not introduced any legislation. He talks a lot about border security, but not immigration reform.
Congressman, same question. Immigration, legal and illegal, is an ongoing problem. What solutions might the federal government offer to deal with this challenge?
Joe Biden has failed the American people on the southern border. Just last year, 2.4 million illegals entered our country. That's the ones we know about. We have no idea how many on the terror watch list got through. We have no idea how many drug dealers, gang members, human traffickers. We have no idea how many violent prisoners Venezuela shipped through our southern border. We have 190 plus recognized countries in this world. Over 160 have sent illegal immigrants through our southern border. And with that comes drugs and fentanyl. Fentanyl is killing more Americans between the ages of 18 and 45 than anywhere else in the history of this country. And these are policies that my opponent supports. These are Joe Biden's failed policies that my opponent supports. Open borders. It's endangering every single American. What we need to do is we need to finish securing our border. We need to put that wall up in those high crossing areas. We need more Border Patrol agents, and we need more technology. I was down to our southern border twice. I've seen it firsthand. These suggestions are recommendations by the Border Patrol professionals, and I want to listen to them, but I've seen it firsthand, the devastation that's happening after I've talked to community members and sheriffs and Border Patrol agents down south.
Jen, 30 seconds for additions.
We have really good Border Patrol agents here. They just caught 5 people, 4 from the Ukraine, 1 from Ireland, crossing our border here in the 8th District. But most of us in this room, our grandparents, great-grandparents were immigrants. That's what we have to remember. They are simply, to dismiss immigrants as simply murderers and rapists is cruel, inhumane. We should not hear that type of language. But you know what? Drugs are a problem, especially in the 8th District. Addiction is a problem that we need to address, and my opponent takes a lot of money from lobbyists that work for the pharmaceutical companies.
30 seconds for rebuttal, Congressman.
Again, 2.4 million illegals came through our southern border last year because of Joe Biden's open border policies and policies that my opponent supports. What we need to do is listen to the experts on the southern border. We need to secure our southern border because a secure border is a secure nation. We can do better than open border policies that are costing everybody. And by the way, Joe Biden wants to have these illegal immigrants put on Social Security and Medicare again, punishing our seniors.
I don't know where he's getting my voting record on border security. I'm not in Congress. I'm in the Minnesota House. He's tying me to Biden. I don't work under the Biden administration. I work for the Minnesota House of Representatives. I wish he would quit lying.
Would you support open borders?
You already answered that question, and it's a lie.
Well, we have reached the point in the debate, the forum, I should say, where we are here for our closing statements on the part of our candidates. But before we began tonight, I asked them the very last question on my list. They've already had it in mind for the last 50 minutes, and now they're going to respond. Congressman, what is something nice or positive you can say about your opponent?
You know, Jen is a mother. I respect and adore and revere mothers. My wife, Jody, is a great mother to my 5 children and our foster daughter. It is a tough job, and I appreciate what all moms do.
Jen, something nice or positive you can say about your opponent?
Yes, I am a mother of 2 lovely boys. Thank you for saying that, Pete. And I really appreciate your service to on the Duluth Police Force. I think being a police officer is really hard work. And everyone in public safety. My father was a firefighter and an EMT. And he was battling a tumor in his liver, probably from PFAS in firefighting foam or Agent Orange when he served in Vietnam. And he wanted to respond after 9/11 by driving to New York City, because that's what our first responders do. They step up and they do that work. So I want to thank him for his service.
And thank both of you. 2 minutes for close or 3?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Congressman, you got the first. Jen, you get the first close. 3 minutes.
I think it was Stauber that goes first on the close.
Oh, Congressman?
Yeah. Well, thanks again to everyone watching. And, you know, I believe in the workers throughout the Northland. I believe in our mining and our manufacturing and all the industries that are abundant here in our part of Minnesota. I believe in working families. You are doing all you can to stay afloat in Biden's failed economy that is costing you thousands and thousands of dollars more each year. Our retirement security is threatened. Our savings are depleted. I feel your pain because Jody and I, with 6 kids, are feeling it too. We must stop Joe Biden's reckless spending that's led to a 40-year high inflation that is punishing Minnesota working families. And we can do our part right here on the range by getting our mining industry moving again. When it comes to your choice on Election Day, it's clear only one of us will fight for our way of life. My opponent is endorsed by Friends of the Boundary Waters, whose stated purpose is to ban mining on the Iron Range. She is funded by Betty McCollum's Super PAC, who wants to permanently ban copper nickel mining in Minnesota. My opponent is the chief author of the most anti-mining piece of legislation in our state's history. And let's be clear, she supports Joe Biden pulling the Twin Metals leases. To everyone watching today, you know where I stand. I'll say it again because it's worth repeating. I support iron ore, copper, nickel, and precious metals mining, and I'm the only one in the race that can say that. We've covered a lot of ground today. If you want our nation to be energy independent and critical mineral dominant, I humbly ask for your vote. If you and your family want safe streets and want to feel safe in your homes, I ask for your vote. If you want safe and secure borders, I ask for your vote. If you are a parent who wants a say in your child's education and know what's going on in their classroom, I ask for your vote. If you want to maintain your personal freedoms and want government to stay out of your personal life, I ask for your vote. If you think we can do better than a 40-year high inflation, $5 a gallon gas, and record heating bills, I ask for your vote. If you want to allow our miners to mine, our farmers to farm, and our loggers to log, I ask for your vote. It's an honor in Congress advocating for you and your families. It's an honor fighting for our way of life. I'm Pete Stauber, and I humbly ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Jen, 3 minutes for close.
Before I start, I need to correct the record, and this is very important. I am not the chief author of the Prove It First bill. That's Jen McEwen, who's a state senator in Duluth. Just to correct the record, that is a lie that he keeps repeating. Okay. Pete, I don't know what you mean by our way of life, and I don't think you understand the struggles that families are. I grew up poor. I relate and understand the struggles of people throughout the 8th district. I understand Pete has gone DC. He cares more about the party than the people he's supposed to represent. His way of life is being wined and dined by lobbyists in DC, driving around in a very fancy campaign vehicle. If he wins, he would collect 2 pensions and have a salary of $170,000. Most people don't collect 2 pensions and have that high of a salary. It's just not the way of life in the 8th district. I fully support pensions, but people don't have that wealth in this district. We thought he would be effective. We thought he would get things done, and he's really let us down, really let the 8th district down. And I'm running because I'm giving people the choice, a choice to get things done for the people in the 8th district, for our rural communities, to make sure they're all thriving. And I've been endorsed by almost every labor union and group that supports working people, yes, and environmental groups, so everybody trusts me, so I can come to the table and move mining forward, because plants are idling, and Pete Stauber isn't doing anything about that, and I want to do that. I want to make sure our mines are thriving and expanding, and we have job diversification. So you have a choice in this election. I've been endorsed by 7 of the largest conservative papers throughout the district, papers that endorse my opponent twice. Papers that say Pete Stauber is too partisan and unresponsive to constituents. That's a big deal. I always fight for the underdogs. I've been an underdog much of my life, and many people think our district's been overlooked. It's been overlooked by Pete Stauber. He's accomplished nothing. He's bought by corporate interests. He sought to overturn the presidential election. He doesn't show up. He takes extreme positions. He's against our right to abortion and our right to contraception, rights we've had, liberties we've had for 50 years. That's a big problem. So you can vote for that, or you can vote for me. I'm gonna work as hard as you. I promise. I'm a proven leader. I find solutions. I work across the aisle. I'm accountable to you, not corporations. I'm going to support our rights to choose whether and when to have a family, our rights to send our children to the best school, our right to read any book, our right to marry who we love, and our right to vote, because I truly believe when we invest in our communities, when we invest in people, we all do better. I'm Jen Schultz, and I ask for your support. Thank you.
And thank you to both of our candidates tonight. Thank you to my co-moderator here, and to HPAT, and to Shelley for timing. And thanks to all of you for coming tonight. I hope you've gotten an education about running forums and also about debating, and we appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.